Inside the cold alien interrogation chamber aboard a massive warship orbiting an unknown planet, the air felt heavy and unnatural, as if the room itself was alive, and breathing the walls were not smooth like human ships, but made of dark metallic. Plates that pulsed with strange vibrations. The sound was low and deep, like the slow heartbeat of some unseen creature. Lights embedded high above flickered in a perfect rhythm, throwing long, sharp shadows that crawled across the curved floor. In the center of the room, a levitating chair hovered without any visible support, and on it sat Lieutenant Alex Carter, his wrists and ankles bound by glowing restraints that tightened each time he moved. His uniform was torn, the fabric darkened with patches of blood and dirt, but his eyes were calm, steady, and without fear. Around him, 3 alien species stood in a half-circle, watching him with expressions humans could barely read, the Jarkai, tall, insectoid beings with shimmering black exoskeletons. Clicked their mandibles softly, their multiple eyes reflecting the pulsing lights like polished stones. To Alex's left stood the Velon, whose crystal-like bodies refracted the dim light into shards of color that danced across the walls. Their voices, when they spoke, sounded like wind chimes deep underwater behind them. The hulking Drakon shifted restlessly, the reptilian warriors' scaled hides glistening with a faint, oily sheen, and their slitted eyes unblinking. The tallest of them stepped forward, his voice like grinding stone as he spoke. "Human, why did your kind resist? We offered surrender, we offered survival, yet you chose war. You had no chance of winning." His tone carried both confusion and insult, but Alex only looked at him for a long moment before answering, his voice steady, low, and measured. "That's where you're wrong." The room fell silent. The aliens exchanged glances as if uncertain whether to laugh or feel threatened. The Drakon's tail twitched, the Jarkai's antenna froze. Even the faint hum of the chamber seemed to hesitate for a heartbeat before resuming. The Velon moved closer, their crystalline form bending the light around them. They asked, "Explain your defiance. Your species is young, small, and without the strength to challenge the coalition. Why do you fight? Knowing defeat is certain." Alex's lips curved into the faintest smile, but he said nothing. Instead, his gaze drifted to the upper corner of the room, where a small, almost invisible, bulge disrupted the otherwise seamless metal wall. He knew it was a surveillance node, and he knew someone on the other side was listening. His voice, when it came again, was quiet, almost casual, and yet every syllable seemed to weigh heavily in the air. "We fight, because we've already been where you are now, only you don't see it yet." The Jarkai clicked in agitation. One of them stepped forward, its long arms tipped with serrated claws that could slice through steel. It bent its head close to him and hissed, "Explain, or your life ends here." But Alex's eyes did not flinch. He leaned forward as far as his restraints allowed and spoke with a strange calm. "You think I'm the one trapped here, but you're wrong. All of you are." He didn't raise his voice, yet somehow it seemed louder than the hum of the walls, louder than the sound of the alien breath. The words hung between them, unsettling in a way no physical threat could be. The Draken snarled, a low rumble in his throat, and slammed a clawed fist against the floor plates, making the chair wobble slightly. The lights flickered faster for a second before returning to their steady pulse. The Velon tilted their head, the refracted light in their body shifting from soft blues to sharp reds, as if their mood had darkened. The leader of the group stepped even closer, towering over Alex and casting a shadow that stretched across the entire chair. "Perhaps you think this is a game, human? Perhaps you believe your words can save?" You, Alex, stared back, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not to save me, to end you." For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. The aliens studied him as if trying to read something in his face, but his expression remained unchanged. And then, almost imperceptibly, a faint red light blinked on in the corner where the surveillance node was hidden. Alex's eyes flicked toward it for a fraction of a second, and his lips twitched into something dangerously close to a smile it was enough to make. The Velon shift uneasily enough to make the Jarkai's mandibles click in frustration, enough to make the Drakon's tail lash against the floor. The hum of the walls continued, the flicker of the lights continued, and in that strange, alien heartbeat of a room, everyone felt it, without knowing why the interrogation had already changed everything. 1 week before, Alex Carter sat in that alien interrogation chamber. The sky over Earth had turned into a battlefield of impossible colors, and shapes the first ships of the alien coalition had appeared without warning, blotting out the sun over New York, Tokyo, and London. Massive silhouettes drifting in silence before releasing swarms of smaller craft like hunting birds humanity had. Not been ready? No one could have been ready for an enemy that seemed to bend light and space with every movement. The Coalition's broadcast had been short and cold: surrender your world and survive, resist, and be erased. Most governments had argued for peace talks, but those talks ended before they began when a fleet destroyed an unarmed orbital station in plain view of millions. The shock of it had set fire to human resolve. Ordinary people flooded recruitment centers, scientists scrambled to weaponize whatever scraps of alien tech had been recovered from previous encounters, and Alex, a communications officer with a background in cryptography, found himself pulled into something far larger than decoding routine transmissions. His first encounter with the alien signal came 3 days into the war. It was unlike any code he had seen, and yet it was written with almost deliberate imperfections, as though someone wanted it to be noticed. He worked alone in a dim room filled with humming consoles and the constant chatter of panicked military channels. His eyes traced the repeating patterns the way a musician might hear a hidden rhythm in chaos. The message was short, only a few bursts of sound repeated in a cycle. But he knew it was important. He didn't report it up the chain immediately. Instead, he kept listening night after night, drinking bad coffee, staring at glowing screens while the war outside grew worse. Ships fell, cities burned, and the alien coalition advanced with terrifying precision. Then the pattern shifted for just one transmission, a subtle change barely noticeable to anyone else. But to Alex, it was as if someone had whispered directly into his ear. He realized then that this was not coalition. Communication. It was something hidden within it, perhaps from a faction or individual with their own agenda. He had no idea whether it was friend or foe, but he knew that in war, an enemy's secrets were as valuable as weapons, while command focused on direct defense. Alex began weaving false responses into the coalition's communication bands, not in their language, but in human speech, laced with idiom slang and double meanings, the kind of language no translation system could fully understand. Each message was meant to provoke confusion, to plant tiny seeds of mistrust between the alien factions. It worked slowly, at first strange delays in their attacks. Ships that seemed to move against orders intercepted reports of arguments between alien captains, but Alex never had time to turn this into a formal strategy before he was taken. During an evacuation mission in the chaos of an orbital ambush, his shuttle was crippled and boarded by Drakon warriors. They didn't kill him. They didn't even injure him beyond a few heavy blows. Instead, they bound him and took him aboard their warship, not as a prisoner of war, but as something else, something valuable in the interrogation chamber. The aliens pressed him for answers about the signals they believed he had intercepted. They wanted to know what he had heard, and more importantly, what he had sent back, but Alex never answered directly. His calm was not an act. He had already realized something the coalition didn't want to admit even to themselves. They were not one united people. They were an alliance held together by fear and temporary necessity. Each species had its own ambitions, its own grudges and secrets, and all Alex had to do was feed those fractures until the cracks became impossible to ignore. So when the crystalline Velon leaned forward and asked again, "What did you mean when you said we are where you were?" Alex looked right through them as if speaking to someone else entirely and said, I mean, you're standing on the edge and you can't even feel it. Yet. His tone was quiet but unshakable, and somewhere deep inside, the ship a faint vibration trembled through the floor, almost as if the warship itself had felt the words, the Jarkai, clicked irritably, and demanded to know the human's intent. But Alex only smiled slightly, the same way he had when he first saw the surveillance node blink in the corner. He had spoken his coded message the moment he sat down, and he knew someone. Another human was out there hearing every word. The moment Alex had spoken that quiet, cryptic line, the one that made the room fall into uneasy silence, he knew it had reached its real target somewhere in the maze of metal corridors and humming machinery. Another human was listening, Sergeant. Lena Ward, an engineer captured weeks earlier and thought by most to be dead. She was alive, deep in the lower decks, locked in a maintenance cell surrounded by alien machinery. She had spent her captivity studying every flicker of light and hum of power systems on the warship. When Alex's voice came through the ventilation system disguised among the steady drone of environmental systems, her eyes snapped open. She recognized his tone immediately. They had trained together years ago, and she knew his skill with coded language, if he was here. And speaking like that, it meant he had a plan in the interrogation chamber. Alex remained motionless as the Drakon interrogator stomped closer, the creature's scaled bulk casting jagged shadows. Over him, you will tell us what transmissions you intercepted, or we will extract the knowledge directly. Alex didn't look at him instead. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes fixed on the crystalline Velon, and said, You ever notice how humans say the same thing can mean two different things, depending on how you hear it? The Velon tilted their head, light fracturing in their translucent body. Explain. Alex smiled faintly. If I tell someone break a leg, I don't mean harm them, but you might not know that, right? The Velon's colors shifted uncertainly from red to blue. The Jarkai clicked in confusion and muttered among themselves. The Drakon snarled in irritation, believing Alex was stalling. But every phrase, every misplaced idiom, every casual turn of speech was for Lena, each one embedded with specific instructions. Only she would understand references to shared memories, code numbers disguised as offhand remarks, the kind they had both used during survival training years. Before, while the aliens tried to decipher what they thought were riddles, Lena quietly moved into action. She began rerouting secondary power feeds in her section of the ship, using improvised tools she had hidden from her captors each time she made a change. She matched it to the instructions hidden in Alex's words, and step by step, she laid the groundwork for something the aliens would never expect back in the chamber. The tension was building, the Jarkai faction leader was growing. Impatient, he hissed at the others. This is pointless. Humans waste our time. We should end it. But the Velon disagreed. Something about the human's speech unsettled them, as though he knew more than he should. Meanwhile, the Drakon just wanted to use force. Their claws flexing every few moments in quiet threat, Alex noticed every reaction cataloging them in his mind. These species did not trust each other. They barely tolerated each other's presence here. That was the true weakness, and all he needed to do was press on it. He glanced at the Jarkai and said, Funny thing about alliances, they last right up until someone whispers the wrong secret into the wrong ear. The Jarkai froze, their multifaceted eyes narrowing. What do you mean by that? Alex didn't answer directly. He only leaned back in the chair, his restraints glowing faintly, and said, I mean that when you stop looking at me and start looking at each other, you'll see what's really going on. His words hung heavy. In the air, each alien faction silently wondering if their rivals knew something they didn't. Far below the chamber, Lena made her final adjustment, the last piece of the plan falling into place. She glanced at the nearest bulkhead and whispered, to herself, Your move. Carter in the chamber. Alex noticed the faintest flicker in the light, the kind of small power fluctuation only someone watching for it would see. He let his eyes drift toward the surveillance node again, and then looked back. At the aliens with a calm, steady gaze, you think you're holding me here. But the truth is I'm the one holding you. And as the lights flickered a second time, a subtle low alarm began to pulse somewhere far in the ship, unnoticed by most, but not by the ones who knew exactly what it meant. The first step of the escape had just begun. The low alarm echoed faintly through the alien warship like a heartbeat out of rhythm, not loud enough to send the crew into panic, but just enough to ripple. Unease through those who were listening closely, Alex caught the twitch of the Jarkai's antennae, the slight pause in the Veilon's crystalline hum, and the brief narrowing of the Dracon's reptilian eyes. Each species reacted differently, but they all noticed it. The interrogation chamber's lights dimmed for a moment before stabilizing. The Veilon stepped closer, their refracted light shifting from cool blue to a sharp amber, and asked, "What have you done?" "Human." Alex tilted his head, as if he hadn't heard them clearly, and said, "You ever hear the phrase, the beginning of the end?" The Veilon's colors shifted again, uncertain, and the Jarkai clicked in irritation. "Enough riddles, explain yourself," the Drakon growled low in their throat, their massive form blocking part of the light, while the tip of their tails scraped along the floor. Alex kept his tone calm, almost casual, but every word was a pressure point aimed at the fragile balance between them. Funny thing about coalitions. He said they're strongest when everyone believes the same story, but the moment someone hears a different one, everything starts to crack. The Jarkai turned sharply toward the Drakon, as if suspecting some hidden meaning. The Drakon met their stare with open hostility, rumbling a threat in their guttural tongue. The Veilon's gaze flicked between them and then back to Alex. Suspicion blooming like a shadow in the room outside. The chamber corridors were already alive with quiet tension. Lena had triggered minor system malfunctions in different sections of the ship air filtration, cycling strangely in the Jarkai quarters, light panels stuttering in the Drakon's sector, and temperature shifts in the Veilon's crystalline. Sanctuaries, small irritations, but enough to make each species think sabotage. Alex saw the doubt forming and pushed harder. He leaned forward as far as his glowing restraints allowed and said, "Maybe you should ask each other why those systems keep failing you. Think I could do it from here?" One of the Jarkai hissed accusingly toward the Drakon. "You control the engineering decks?" The Drakon's scales rippled in anger, and they stepped toward the insectoid, their voice a low growl. "We control power. Not your precious air, but maybe someone thought you didn't deserve it." The Veilon interjected, their voice like cold glass shattering enough. "This is distraction." Nothing more, but the words didn't erase the suspicion in their eyes. Lena, meanwhile, moved deeper into the ship's maintenance shafts, guided by Alex's coded instructions. Every step took her closer to the auxiliary control hub, a narrow chamber where the warship's redundant systems could be overridden from a single console. She carried no weapon, only the sharp edge of purpose back in the interrogation room. The tension was now thick enough to taste the alien leader. A massive Drakon stepped forward, towering over Alex, his scaled hands curling into fists. "You speak too freely for a prisoner." Alex met his gaze without blinking and replied, "You don't understand yet, but soon you will." The leader's eyes narrowed. "What will I understand that you've already lost?" Alex said, and at that exact moment, the lights in the chamber flickered a second time, not just a blink but a steady rhythm. 3 slow pulses, then darkness, then 3 more pulses, a code. Only Lena and Alex knew the Jarkai's antennae quivered in alarm. The Veilon shifted uneasily, and the Drakon took a half step back as if sensing something wrong. The leader snarled enough of this and raised a clawed hand as if to strike, but was interrupted by the heavy metallic hiss of the chamber doors sliding open. A Drakon guard stepped, In their posture, rigid, their voice, urgent power. Fluctuations are spreading across all decks. The Jarkai suspects sabotage. The Valon claim they are being targeted. Alex's lips twitched in a faint smile. Almost invisible to the others, chaos was beginning to bloom right on cue. The leader glared down at him and growled. "What did you do?" Alex's answer was quiet, but cut through the noise. "I just told the truth. You're the ones turning it into war inside the warship's vast halls arguments. We're breaking out in alien tongues, suspicion sparking into open hostility. Security patrols doubled, but in doing so, they stripped other areas of guards, and somewhere in those unguarded corridors, Sergeant Lena Ward slipped unseen toward the final switch that would turn a spark of distrust into full fire. The interrogation was still underway, but Alex could feel it in the room already. The alliance was starting to fracture, and he leaned back in his chair, speaking just loud enough for the leader to hear. "You're about to lose control, not to me, but to yourselves." The sound of distant alarms was growing sharper now, echoing through the metal veins of the warship, like the deep toll of some ancient warning bell, and the alien leader could feel the tension pressing in from all sides. The interrogation chambers. Floor vibrated faintly beneath their feet as systems elsewhere in the ship stuttered and failed. Alex sat in the levitating chair, his restraints still glowing, but his posture relaxed as if he had been waiting for this precise moment. The Jarkai commander's antennae twitched rapidly, a sure sign of agitation, while the Valon's crystalline form flickered through shades of red and blue. The Drakon leader's voice rumbled low enough to make the air tremble. "You will tell me now what you've done." But Alex only looked past him to the open doorway where shouts in multiple alien tongues were beginning to filter through. Out in the corridors, the warship was turning into a hive of distrust. Jarkai soldiers accusing Drakon. Warriors of tampering with life support systems, Valon envoys, insisting the others were trying to weaken them before an attack even inside the chamber. The factions were shifting positions, subtly closing ranks against one another instead of facing. Alex Lena was moving fast through the maintenance shafts, following the trail of Alex's coded instructions, each one hidden inside the strange phrases he had spoken earlier. She dropped into a shadowed passage that smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil. Her stolen key crystal fitting perfectly into the auxiliary control hub's locking mechanism. The console lit up in a pale green glow as she began inputting override codes. Every few seconds, she could feel the thud of alien footsteps nearby. But they never stopped to check the unmarked hatch she was working behind back in the interrogation chamber. The Drakon leader turned to the Jarkai with a hiss. "Perhaps this human is not your enemy but mine. Perhaps you brought him here to weaken us." The Jarkai's mandibles clattered angrily. "You dare accuse us when your guards control the engineering decks?" The Valon stepped forward, their voice chiming with sharp edges. "We all know the Drakon would seize any excuse to take power from the rest. Perhaps this is their plan." The argument was growing heated. Weapons were not yet drawn, but the air was thick with the possibility. Alex leaned forward, his voice low, almost conversational. "You hear that? That's the sound of trust dying." The leader snapped his gaze back to Alex. "What have you done to this ship?" Alex smiled slightly. "Nothing you didn't already do yourselves." His words were timed perfectly with the next pulse of alarms, this one deeper and accompanied by a flicker in the gravity field that made everyone sway on their feet. Even the levitating chair shifted for a moment. Alex could tell Lena had reached the second phase of the plan. The Valon's crystalline surface flashed bright orange in alarm as a communication. Feed whispered urgently in their ear, more systems failing suspected sabotage spreading across the ship. The leader bared his teeth. Enough he lunged forward, reaching for Alex, but at that instant, the restraints on the chair flickered and died. Lena's final sequence had just broken the chamber's security grid. Alex moved like a coiled spring snapping free. In one motion, he twisted sideways, catching the leader's clawed arm and using its own momentum to pull the massive creature off balance. The Drakon crashed sideways into a Jarkai, sending the insectoid sprawling across the floor before the guards could react. Alex had seized the fallen Jarkai's weapon, a curved plasma blade that hummed with deadly light. He stepped back, toward the open door, his eyes never leaving the aliens inside the room. "You want to know what I intercepted?" he said. "I intercepted the moment you stopped being allies." The doorway erupted into chaos as voices shouted from the corridor, reports of fighting in other decks, explosions in the lower engine levels, and entire sections sealing off automatically. Alex backed into the hall just as Lena emerged from a side passage, her face streaked with sweat and determination. She tossed him a compact, alien sidearm and said, "We have 5 minutes, maybe less." They ran together through the narrowing corridors, lights flashing, sirens wailing behind them, the sound of alien boots pounding on metal floors. The warship was unraveling from the inside just as Alex had planned, and as they rounded the corner toward the docking bay, he glanced at Lena with a grin. "See, told you they were holding me, but I was holding them." She shook her head, smiling. "Despite the danger. You're insane, Carter, but lead the way." The docking bay was a storm of chaos, lit by the strobe of flashing red alarms and the deep thrum of the warship's failing engines. The air was thick with smoke from small electrical fires and the metallic tang of scorched circuits' alien crew. Members of every faction were shouting over one another, some trying to restore order, others abandoning their posts entirely. Jarkai soldiers had barricaded one entrance with jagged debris, while Drakon warriors clashed with Valon security. Drones in bursts of bright energy fire, Alex and Lena kept low moving between the towering landing struts of docked vessels, their stolen alien sidearms hot in their hands. Alex scanned the bay quickly, eyes narrowing on a sleek dart-shaped craft, near the far wall, smaller than the others, fast enough to slip through whatever blockade the coalition might form over comms. They could hear snippets of the alien factions accusing each other of betrayal, weapons fire echoing through the channels. Somewhere far above them, the deep rumble of the ship's main reactor grew into a sickly, shuddering throb that made the deck vibrate. Lena glanced at Alex. "You think the whole thing's going to blow?" Alex kept moving. "Not if we leave first, to Drakon." Guards spotted them from across the bay. One raised a weapon, but Alex fired first, the alien sidearm, releasing a thin bolt of white light that punched into the guard's chest, dropping him instantly. The second dove for cover, returning fire that sizzled against the bay wall. Lena ducked behind a cargo container and fired back her shot, catching the alien in the shoulder, forcing him to retreat. They sprinted toward the dart-shaped craft, weaving through the confusion. More aliens were flooding into the bay, some shouting orders, others ignoring them entirely as the fracture between factions widened. Alex reached the craft first, slapping a palm against the glowing panel by the hatch. It hissed open, revealing a narrow cockpit filled with controls marked in alien glyphs. Lena slid into the pilot's chair, her fingers moving with practiced precision over unfamiliar controls. She had studied the Coalition's tech during her captivity, and though every model had differences, the fundamentals remained the same. Alex kept his weapon trained on the hatch as she worked. A deep, metallic clang echoed through the bay as one of the massive hangar doors began to close, either an automated lockdown or someone trying to trap them. Lena's voice was sharp. "We don't have long." The engines roared to life, vibrating through the hull, and Alex climbed into the co-pilot's seat, glancing out the canopy at the chaos below in the central part of the bay. The alien leader from the interrogation chamber had arrived, flanked by both Jarkai and Drakon warriors. Their weapons were lowered, but their voices were raised in furious argument. Even now, they were blaming each other more than they were chasing him. The docking clamps released, with a loud metallic snap, and Lena guided the craft toward the narrowing gap of the hangar doors. Alex's gaze flicked to the leader below. Catching the alien's eyes for a brief second, he raised 2 fingers in a casual salute, the kind that said, "Checkmate." Then the craft shot forward, slipping through the shrinking opening and into the cold, black expanse of space behind them. The warship loomed like a wounded predator, its massive hull scarred by internal explosions, the glow of its engines. Flickering erratically, ships from different factions were breaking formation, drifting away from each other, some firing warning shots, others jumping into faster-than-light escape. Lena kept the throttle open, putting distance between them, as Alex opened the comms channel broadcasting across every coalition frequency, his voice calm and steady. Attention, all forces of the coalition. You've been lied to by each other, not by us. You've been played by your own allies who would rather see you fall than share power, and now you all know it. We're leaving you to settle that yourselves. The message cut out, and for a long moment there was only the hum of the engines and the distant twinkle of alien ships scattering across the stars. Lena glanced sideways at him. That little speech just made you the most hated man in 3 star systems. Alex grinned, maybe, but it also made me the most unpredictable. And that's the thing about humans, we don't win because we're stronger. We win because we do the thing. No one expects. The warship behind them convulsed in a final shudder, a ripple of light running along its length as if the vessel itself sighed before tearing apart in a silent bloom of fire, the pieces drifting like embers into the dark. Lena kept her eyes on the path ahead, already scanning for the faint blue shimmer of Earth's distant beacon. Alex leaned back, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. They had survived against the odds, and not just survived. They had changed the battlefield without firing a single shot more than necessary. Somewhere out there, the coalition would be tearing itself apart for years, and humanity would have time to prepare. He looked at Lena with a faint smile. Guess we just answered their interrogation in our own way. She smirked without looking away from the stars. Yeah, and I don't think they liked the answer.